Welcome to episode 8 of So What Do You Do? I created this podcast as a way to give out free and public information to college students, professionals looking to make a career shift, and upper management wanting to learn more about early career professionals and their experience in their industries thus far. Today we have my 8th guest, the very driven Shannon Westerberg. Shannon, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Of course. I'm happy to be here. Like I said earlier to you, this is my first podcast.
So my first question for you is the same question I ask all my guests, the title of the show, and that is, so what do you do?
I am a pediatric occupational therapist, and I work right now currently at a children's hospital.
I didn't know that you worked with children specifically.
I do, yeah. I didn't start with kids, but this is where I've ended up, and this is where I find the most joy.
Is that common to work in pediatric occupational therapy? For some reason, I guess I've never heard of that until now.
There actually are I don't know if I would say a majority, but I think it's split because a lot of OTs work with kids, a lot of work with adults, and then there's another subset that work in like the mental health sphere.
Wow, that is really fascinating. How did you first discover the field of occupational therapy?
Well, it all started when I was in high school. I was doing volunteer hours with Special Olympics, and I was an assistant basketball coach, which is pretty funny because I've like never played basketball in my life, but I was an assistant basketball coach for Special Olympics, and I had no idea what I wanted to do when I went to college. And I was just talking to one of the other coaches there, and I was like, I really love it here. Like, I love working with all of these people. The people in the Special Olympics, range from people with autism, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, epilepsy. So kind of across the spectrum of different abilities. But I was like, I just find that I'm so happy every time I come here. I love being here. Like, I started doing it to fulfill school hours and then just kept doing it because I liked it so much. And somebody there was like, you should look at occupational therapy. And I had never heard of it before. I'd heard of physical therapy, speech therapy, and just like psychology, but never OT. So I looked it up. To be honest, I didn't do the deepest of dives. I kind of like read the definition and was like, this sounds cool. And then when I was applying for schools, I actually saw it on a school's like major list. So I was like, sure, I'll apply for that. And then luckily I liked it, and it all just ended up working out.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, that's really cool. And so could you just like loosely or briefly define what it means to be an occupational therapist and what occupational therapy as a field entails?
Yes, I get this question a lot because everyone knows like what physical therapy is. Everyone knows what speech therapy is, but when people first hear occupational therapy, they often think like, "Oh, you help people get jobs," which I guess like could be a type of occupational therapy, but the definition itself is like we are rehab professionals that help people resume or participate in their daily occupations. And occupations is very broad to encompass anything that you need or want to do on a daily basis. So that's when you hear the definition, it's like it's so broad, which is great because OTs can really do a lot of different things. So we work, I'll just give you some examples. Like some OTs work in hospitals with individuals who've had a stroke or a brain injury and help them get back to their like daily functioning. Some OTs work with the population of homeless individuals and help them try to get back on their feet or help people struggling with substance abuse. And then some OTs work with kids in schools, people in nursing homes. So it really, there's a large spectrum of like settings that you can work in, but the general, like if we boil it down to like one thing, we help people get back to doing the things that they need to do and want to do on a daily basis.
I actually thought what occupational therapy was like helping people do daily activities from like a physical perspective. So like, opening the refrigerator after having a stroke, making food. And it sounds like that's a part of it. But is there also like a mental aspect to it too?
Yes. So part of the training in school, we have a whole semester dedicated to mental health. So one way to look at it is I feel like OT combines the physical and the mental, and it's it's a really holistic profession. So you're looking at like why can't somebody do this thing not only from a physical perspective but also from like an emotional and a cognitive and a mental standpoint.
That is so fascinating and such a cool job. I feel like that you have to be a very well-rounded individual to do something like that. You did bring up school, and it's actually I'm happy you did because that leads me to my next question. Could you walk us through where you went to school, what you got your education in, and how that led to maybe your first job as an occupational therapist?
Yes. So, like I mentioned before, I just found OT on a list of majors, and that was at USC. So, for OT, you have to get a master's, which I didn't know when I applied. Um, and USC has a bachelor's to master's program. So, you actually major in occupational therapy. And once you hit your senior year is when you start your master's program. So, you start grad school your senior year. So my first 3 years were all like undergrad courses with OT courses mixed in with that. My senior year, I started the master's program and I did that for 2 years. So the master's is 2 years. And then there is a doctorate. At the time that I was in school, it was optional. So you could get your doctorate for one more year. Um, I believe in 2025, they're making it mandatory. So similar to PTs all have to get a doctorate, and that their schooling is 3 years. Ours was two for a while, but now I think I might be incorrect, but I think in 2025 it's going to be mandatory for OTs to get a doctorate as well.
And do you currently have your doctorate? And if not, is that something you're looking to go and do, or do you think having your undergraduate and your master's is enough to suffice given the current market?
I do have my doctorate. It for me because I felt like I saved a year of undergrad. I was like, I might as well do one more and just get it done and over with. I think like plenty of my colleagues don't have a doctorate, and I don't think it changes a whole lot. Um, if I didn't get it, I don't know if I would go back to get it. But if you're more interested in like research, teaching, those are reasons that maybe people would go back and get their doctorate, having not done it like directly out of school.
And first off, congratulations, Dr. Westerberg. I didn't know that you had your doctorate. I knew you had done post grad, but that is really cool. Now that you're in your current role, what are some of the major things you really love about what you do?
I think, well, one, I really love my job. So when I was a student, it was one of my, we call it field work, but it's like your clinical rotations. So it was one of my field work rotations at this children's hospital. And I like fell in love with it. And I think looking back, and even to this day, like some of the reasons that I love this job, the main one is the patient population. The kids are so amazing. We are a nonprofit, so we work with a lot of underserved communities. And these kids are just, they're incredible. Some of them are going through the most challenging situations, the most painful things that I can think of. And they still like manage to put a smile on my face every day. So I think it's really wonderful to be able to work with them and their families. The families are always very gracious. Okay, not always, but most of the families, because I mean, again, they're also going through very stressful things, but these families are gracious, they're kind, they are also fun to work with. So I think the main part I love about my job are the kids. But also where I work, I have an awesome team. There are a lot of mentors and opportunities to be a mentor. So the opportunities for growth from like a knowledge perspective are also huge. There are so many different parts of the hospital that you can work in, different areas you can specialize in. So I just feel like every day I'm learning something new, and it's such a great place to be, to learn, to grow. And honestly, my team members have become like they feel like family to me. So it's a really great place.
One thing I'm really interested in about your field is the accessibility to resources. So, I've interviewed a nurse prior, and, there's things in society that seem like there's a conventional understanding of how accessible they are to the public. when it comes to things like occupational therapy, physical therapy, behavioral health specialists, that form of therapy, it seems to be a little bit more vague. So, could you talk a little bit about how people are able to access occupational therapy? Is it something that's paid for through insurance, or is it more privately paid?
I would say there are, like, most insurances will cover occupational therapy. Um, it kind of depends where you go and what you need. So there's a big need for occupational therapists who work with like sensory integration for kids, and a lot of those clinics will take insurance. But let's say if you have like Medi-Cal, it's a lot harder to get it covered or to find a clinic that will take Medi-Cal. So for example, at our hospital, most of our families have Medi-Cal, so they are able to be seen at the hospital for free. But when it's time to refer out, we often have a lot of difficulty trying to find like a clinic space that they might be able to go to that is covered by insurance. And then there is a whole nother like sphere of OT that is private practice. So there's kind of like a mix. But I would say like it's not it's not like going to the doctor, where like pretty much everyone has a doctor, everyone has access to a doctor. Um, it's more like a physical therapy as well.
Right, right. That totally makes sense. And that was a really thorough answer. I really appreciate that. Is there anything, and maybe what we just spoke about is something, but is there anything that you would change about your industry? Anything about your industry that you think we could progress in further?
Yeah, I think like touching back on what I just mentioned, I think awareness of what occupational therapy is something that would be great if that could improve. Um, like I said in the very beginning, like everyone knows what PT is, like everyone knows what speech therapy is, but most of the time, like if I'm out and people ask, like, what do you do? I have to explain what occupational therapy is, which is great, which is fine. But we really have to advocate for the profession. And it's not always just a given that like people know what OT is. So I think increased awareness would be great. And the other thing I think is, and I think everyone would probably say this about their job, but compensation. It depends on what setting you work in, but compensation does not always like correlate to years of like education, for example. So I think that's that's an area where I'm sure everyone with a job would say that they would like to change, but um, I would say for OT, it'd be great to be compensated just slightly
Yeah, yeah, that's that. Both of those things that you would like to see progress in are two things that kind of blow my mind because I feel like the role of an occupational therapist, again, it's like um, one of the most important roles I think you can play in the sense of like, yeah, we all know what physical therapists are, doctors are, nurses are, but occupational therapists are really helping people live just basic day-to-day functions. And maybe that's why it's not as known because it might be more the patients that you help might be a little bit more in more unique situations, things that aren't commonly experienced. And then yeah, when it comes to pay, actually the nurse that I had on prior express the same thing, which is so bizarre to me because I feel like you guys are both in some of the most important roles. You should be compensated fairly. Um, what does, and if you don't have the answer to this, that's totally fine. I don't think anybody really does, but just from like a general point of view, what does the future of employment look like for occupational therapy? Is this something where you see there's going to be a lot of jobs in the future, or is it something where some of my guests say they're afraid of being replaced by AI? Is what does the future of employment look like for your industry?
So I don't think that OT will ever be replaced by robots. I think because it's such a hands-on profession, our jobs are pretty secure. So, like for example, if you're working like with somebody on how to relearn how to get dressed, like you have to help them get dressed. Like I just don't know that a robot could do that, which is great. Like we're gonna have jobs. And I just remember going through school, our professors would always say like, oh, with the baby boomer generation getting older, there's going to be a huge need for OTs and that want to work with the geriatric population. So I honestly think in the future there will probably be more need for OT jobs, if what I've been told, if the predictions stand true. Um, but yeah, I think it's something that'll be around for a while. I really do.
Yeah, that's great to hear, and I think that stands to be true for most jobs, hands-on jobs in the healthcare industry. I feel like those are things that you just have to have that human-to-human contact. Um, I asked the nurse that I had interviewed prior to this question, and I think it's a deep question. Obviously, you're faced every day with patients that are going through arguably the toughest times of their lives and their families' lives. How are you able to compartmentalize what you experience on a day to day basis with your patients when you are off the clock, when you go home?
I think you really kind of have to have a separate box. Um, and it's really hard, but I think things that help are like talking about the sad experiences with your coworkers or with your family, with your friends, like having a person that is able to just listen and kind of be there. But also the self-care aspect is huge. Like the nice thing about my job is we work really long days. Like we work 10-hour days, but we typically have a day off in the week. So like using that day to like reset, rejuvenate, exercise, nap, get a massage, like whatever it is, remembering that we have to take care of ourselves because this is a job where if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of other people. So you have to have a separate box and then you have to take care of yourself. That's kind of always the feedback I give. I was just going to add too, though, like that's not to say that I don't like sometimes have dreams about my patients and wake up and wonder how they're doing. So it's like as much as you try to have a separate box, they're always in the back of your mind somehow.
Now that you've gone through all of this schooling and you are where you are in the field of occupational therapy, looking back on it, was it worth it?
Yes. I think I'm very lucky to have a job that I love what I do. Um, and don't get me wrong, like there's always days where like I don't want to go to work, but it's not because I hate my job. It's just usually because I'm tired. But yes, I think like the school was worth it. Like it was all totally worth it because I'm doing something that I'm motivated by. I feel really passionate about, and I feel rewarded like when I come home at the end of the day.
So, if there was a student at USC right now, or any college for that matter, that was listening to this podcast and was really fascinated by what you were saying about what you do and wanted to look into it, what would you tell them to get to where you are today as the occupational therapist that you are?
I would say, like, first off, if you're interested, go try to volunteer in some settings that have OT. So maybe go to a sensory clinic, maybe go to a skilled nursing facility, maybe go to a hospital. See if you volunteer and you're around it and it's something that you feel compelled to do. I think there's a lot of things about just like the day to day that aren't as glamorous, of course, like writing notes and cleaning toys, but just put yourself in the setting to see if this is something that you could do. Um, and then the next thing would be like if you're somebody who is not has not already is not already in college, like if you want to save money, look for programs that do a progressive degree, bachelor's to master's or to doctorate. They'll save a little bit of like a year of school. There's not too many that do that. But if you're just considering it and you aren't sure, then like looking for majors that have like some healthcare background. So I know some people major in psychology, kinesiology, biology. Um, just one, immerse yourself in the setting, see if it's something you really want to do, and then start taking like the classes that would prepare you for that, and see like, okay, it's this now that I'm in it, now that I'm taking the courses, is this something I really like and enjoy?
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And adding on to that, do you feel like your education has been directly applicable to the job you're in now? Like, do you feel like you are constantly leaning back on all the different things you learned? Because I feel like you really went deep in your educational journey into occupational therapy. So, how does that translate? Does that translate pretty well over to what you do today?
Yeah, it's like almost a direct translation. I think one of the great things about my program was we have different what do they call it? We have different, so each semester is a different emphasis. So you have a pediatric emphasis, an adult emphasis, and a mental health emphasis. And while you're in that semester, you are also doing like a clinical rotation where you get to apply like what you're learning in the classroom to the real life treatment settings. And then you do two 12-week, 40-hour a week clinical rotations in like two different settings to like fully get the immersive experience and see like where you might want to work. But I think what we are learning, especially for the grad school part, for undergrad, you have to take your G's and stuff. Those aren't all like super applicable. But for the grad school part, like what we are learning, we are definitely using once you go out into the field.
That's great to hear. I feel like the majority of the people I know that majored in some type of STEM related or got their master's or PhD in some type of STEM related field, science, technology, engineering, math, or medical, it tends to be so much more applicable than a lot of other degrees post graduation. So I'm happy that's the case for you. You've obviously reached a very high standard when it comes to your education. It sounds like you're at a place that you want to be in regards to your current role. But the title of the show is "So What Do You Do?" And my last question for you is: So what will you do next? Where do you see yourself in, let's say, 5 to 10 years?
It's such a hard question because, and I've talked to like my boss about this, that at my job specifically, there are so many different opportunities, like so many things to learn. And I always want to do it all. So I'm like, how do I pick like one thing to specialize in or what? But I think like in the next 5 years, I would love to like have my advanced practice in hands. I think um, that's right now where I'm like really finding myself super interested in. I'm like seeking out extra mentorship. So I think that that's kind of where I'm headed. But I also like want to try to work in all different parts of the hospital. I'm currently in part-time outpatient, part-time inpatient rehab, but we have an acute side. There's so many options. So the the answer is I don't know, but the answer is also like I want to keep doing what I'm doing.
Wow, yeah, it sounds like the hospital you're at is very dynamic. The industry you're in is very dynamic. So I'm sure you're going to reach for the stars and achieve all the things that you've wanted in regards to occupational therapy. Again, I am so impressed by what you do. I think it's such a compassionate role. I really appreciate you coming on here and just spreading some more information regarding OT. And I just wish you all the success moving forward. Thank you so much for your time.
Of course, thank you for having me. It's been fun.